Welcome to the Crossing Ball, and today we're going to talk a little bit about a debate between Thomas TJump and Gavin. What was his name? Gavin Ortland, I believe. Yeah, Gavin Ortland. He's a theologian, really interesting. I've listened to his channel before. Really interesting guy. We're just going to highlight a few aspects of this debate. About God, about various aspects of God, and some of Tom Jump, whatever, some of his misunderstandings and his really unwavering dogmatism toward a specific view about theology and about materialism and about science. He seems to reinterpret, put words in the mouths of scientists, and kind of misrepresent a lot of these issues that are represented in science and in philosophy as well. I think he fails to see the broad sort of the broad spectrum of the broad spectrum of ideas, many different ideas that are equally compelling. He seems to think he's very black and white, and he doesn't see the nuance. And this is definitely not something that a scholar would be able to, or would definitely not look at these issues in the same way that he does. He seems to have a very firm sort of black or white view on these things, and I don't think the scientists that often he cites, or the scientific consensus, as he likes to say, or likes to appeal to, would share his views on philosophy, on theology, on a lot of these things. So, within the purview of science, I'm fine with that. But when scientists begin to remark on philosophical and theological issues, that's obviously where they would admit that they're kind of out of their element, but TJump doesn't seem to think so. He has no respect for them. So let's listen to a little bit of this. We're going to talk about God's desires and what God is. So let's listen to a little bit of this real quick.
And so God could be equally as variable as the universe could be. Why did God have the desire to make humans? Why did God have the desire to make Jesus? Why did God have the desire to do X, Y, Z? And then you would say, well, he could have had a different desire and there'd be a different God. So it's equally as easy to imagine a different kind of a God as it is to imagine a different kind of a universe.
Yeah, I still would disagree that God and the universe are on parallel terms like that. I appreciate the fact that we're approaching our understanding of God from a different angle. So that's probably playing into the disagreement here. What would you make of what I said? I mean, do you rely?
Well, right here, I think Gavin's given him too much steam, or given him too much fuel for steam, because TJump doesn't seem to be a good faith actor in this respect. But I think Gavin should have made a distinction here between what God desires and what God is. Instead, Gavin makes the distinction between God and the universe that he creates. But I think it'd be better because TJump is conflating God's desires and what God is. He's basically saying God could have created the universe to have these particular properties. He could have created them to have these particular properties. But why did he create them to have the specific properties they have? Since they're constrained in a specific way, since the universe is constrained in a specific way to have certain properties, but God could have desired another set of properties, then that is, for TJump, evidence against God. But he's conflating God's desires and God's essence. Just because God wants something doesn't make him the thing he wants. That would be like me saying, since I want a Dr. Pepper, that makes me puts me in a position where I either have to have a Dr. Pepper or I am the Dr. Pepper in some strange way. So, for instance, God wants the universe to have X properties. Therefore, God is a different God from the one that wants or desires a universe with Y properties. This forces determinism on God as a slave to his own desires, which by definition he's not. So Gavin should have pushed back on this notion, which has a simple answer. Now, let's go to another clip. That was kind of a simple slam dunk. I think he could have pointed this out. But let's go to another clip about TJump referencing philosophers and mathematicians and scientists about quantum field theory. So let's listen to a little bit of this. It's kind of interesting.
Studies in history and philosophy of modern physics, a snapshot of foundational attitudes towards quantum mechanics.
Yeah, I'll check it out. My suspicion is that part of what plagues the statistics on a thing like that is, again, equivocation. No, I'm not blaming the scientists just now. I'm just saying.
Well, first of all, let me preface this with this is a poll that TJump's referencing about philosophers, mathematicians, and scientists, and they were stating that quantum field is the best explanation for a foundation for quantum mechanics. Now, what TJump's using this poll for, which was actually just a poll that just polled 48 philosophers, mathematicians, and scientists at a specific conference about the nature of quantum physics. He's equating this with the very nature of reality philosophically, as opposed to reality. Even the term reality, if it is used at all, which I don't even know if it was used in the poll. I think the pollster may have used the term reality when he was referencing some of the aspects of the poll itself, but I don't think the poll, I'd have to look at the poll again, but I don't think it says anything about reality. And if it does, I would imagine it's constrained to the potential states of quantum mechanics, not philosophically what reality is. So TJump here is misrepresenting this poll by stating that it has something to do with a philosophical understanding of reality, and these scientists, philosophers, and mathematicians are in a consensus, just 48 of them, by the way, are in a consensus on quantum fields being sufficient explanation for all of reality, kind of like a reductionistic view. So let's listen a little bit more with this exchange between TJump and Gavin.
There's different definitions of the words that are at play in the discussion, and that causes a problem. I mean, so let me summarize. You tell me if you think this is a correct summary. Both you and I would agree that the chain of causation goes back to something necessary.
Sure.
For you, it's a quantum field or something like that?
Yes, and that is the consensus in physics. You can just Google the William Lane Craig Sean Carroll debate. He explicitly says this: God is not a category of a potential explanation anywhere in physics or quantum mechanics. It's not accepted.
Yeah, of course, because they're not doing theology; they're doing science, and the science is narrowing its focus on physical properties of the universe. Sean Carroll, I don't know. Actually, I'm going to include him in a poll I'm taking, but on theology. But the point is even if you were to ask them and you were to preface the question in the right way, they would at least, say, I don't know. They would have to be agnostic on this issue. Sean, he's probably an atheist, but he has to be agnostic in terms of his view on the philosophical reality, not just how reality relates to quantum states. So right there, he's, TJump is misrepresenting this poll. He's also misrepresenting how nothing or scientific terms are conflated and misrepresented and conflated with philosophical terms. So these, God, of course, is not going to be in an equation, because God is not a purview of analysis any more than I would be in an equation in science, because I am not a purview of research. I'm a subject. I'm someone who actually does or would do the research. I'm not somebody who is researched on. So let's listen a little bit more this back and forth.
They do accept that there is something fundamental, and it's a quantum field.
Well, again, I would disagree with the idea that they do that. I think it's a disputed question, and many cosmologists and physicists would acknowledge that it's not within the field, it's not within the purview of that field to actually pronounce upon God. Because my proposal would say, let there be a zillion quantum fields. Those are not necessary. And it's a historically eccentric way of thinking to slap on the adjective necessary to a quantum field, because it is a contingent reality. So I would say, so to summarize, I would say we both believe in a chain of causation going back to something that's necessary. The reason I think that whether that goes to a quantum field as well behind the universe or not, ultimately that it terminates in God, and that's a better proposal, in my opinion, is because I think it's better to have a personal first cause, and it's better to have a simple first cause. And God is infinitely simple. I think Occam's razor favors that. And I think a personal first cause just makes more sense. You know, I don't know if you'd accept the distinction between event causation and agent causation, but I think to bring about a new state of affairs, such as we see with space-time coming into being at the Big Bang, and I know that there will be different views on how to word that exactly, seems to me to make far more sense to be a personal act, a volitional act. And it's far more intuitive to me, existentially as well as intellectually, to think that the personal doesn't derive from the impersonal, and the universe contains persons like you and me. So we both agree that the chain of causation goes back to something necessary. My view could accommodate any number of quantum fields, but I just wouldn't see them as the actual first. I would say they go back. You have to get back further than that. And I think part of what I would be curious to understand your perspective better would just be, why would a quantum field be necessary? Is that really a better candidate than God? I think a personal and simple candidate makes the best candidate for the first cause.
Yeah, absolutely. So the three things you brought up was, one, it's simple. To me, a God who is creator of the universe is more complex than everything it could potentially create. So that would go against a God hypothesis. Personal beings are not simple. Nothing.
That's not true. God is infinitely simple. I mean, you look at love. Love is incredibly simple. God is love. Love is God. Then you can deduce all of the other properties from that have emanated from God, from love. So he's infinitely simple.
About them
How
is
do you
simple.
mean the word complex there? Sorry to interrupt.
A variation of its possible.
A mechanism is far more complex than an essence or a substance. He has to appeal to a mechanistic system to derive some sort of justification for the entire universe. So every substance or property that we see in the universe is going to have to refer to a mechanism, and even the metaphysical justification for the terms used, even the metaphysical justification for the things we can't see, the things we can't observe, he's going to have to appeal to a mechanism, a system with all these many different parts to essentially make up for the far less complex, the far more parsimonious explanation, which would be love or God, or like for example, Heidegger saw it as Sorge, which is the German word for concern or care, which is the glue that holds everything together. TJump is using scientific language, but science is not interested in a philosophical understanding of what the nature of reality is. I don't know how many times we have to say this. I wish somebody would hammer this home to him through, I don't think he would listen, because he still doesn't understand the difference between philosophy and science, clearly. But we're looking at a philosophical understanding of the nature of reality, not a scientific, particularly within the natural sciences, because the natural sciences, by definition, only look at the natural. If I go into a room, and in the room, I'm only looking for balls, and I see a table, I'm going to ignore the table and only find the ball. It's the same way with a philosophical understanding of reality. So TJump pushes back against what is best known as what's known as the causal adequacy principle, as in what created a star. He talks about a star. It doesn't have to be a star, nor does a cup have to be created by a cup, given that these can emerge from less complex systems. I think later on he says something about how, Gavin says something about, what we came from was a person. The fact that we're people, whatever caused us, has to be a person. Well, TJump uses the example, well, whatever created a cup doesn't have to be a cup. So he uses a false analogy of a cup with a person, because a cup actually has dimensions. A person doesn't have dimensions. So it's a completely improper and irrelevant sort of analogy, right? It's not. It doesn't work. It's not a working analogy. So he uses this argument to demonstrate that which brought about persons doesn't have to be a person. However, this is an oversimplification of a few categories. One is the most fundamental of all categories, the subject-object distinction. One can never treat a subject as an object. The very process of observing or subjecting a person, which is a subject, to observation or analysis is to treat a subject like an object, which is categorically impossible. If the word only has objects, then subject would have to be a subset of objects, or subject acting like an object. But this is contradictory, since the subject to act like an object must assume it is not an object, and we're doing so just to understand the object, and understanding something objectively involves subjecting it to some analogy of objectivity. If subjects are objects, A, they cannot act like objects since they are objects. And B, distinguishing objects from subjects and vice versa would be at best redundant and mundane, but more appropriately at worst, let me see, hold on, got behind a little bit. Where was I at? So, sorry, reading. So they cannot act like objects since they are objects since they are objects, and B, distinguishing objects from subjects and vice versa would be at best redundant and mundane. But more appropriately, at worst, it would be contradictory, incoherent, and would make no sense. However, we do this, therefore, there must be a real distinction between them and not merely some heuristic one. In other words, there has to be a distinction between the subject and the object. TJump is trying to objectify the subject. And he's trying to reduce personhood to something that we can observe. But personhood is not something we can observe because it's the means by which we observe. So this is a categorical impossibility. You try to do that, and you're going to make everything you say incoherent, just like you would taking a sentence and trying to take the subject and the object of the statement and making them both. It would make sense, right? If you had two objects in a sentence, it would be incoherent. Another problem with this criticism of the causal adequacy principle is that a cup assumes cupness, which is the holding of something. Stars would assume starness, which is the illuminating nature of something, and so forth. If these are merely emergent properties, then this would suggest that matter is far more complex than God, since God is in essence love, and love is expressed in these manners, not in his nature, compartmentalized and made up of parts, such as cupness, illumination, etc. These are all included in the concept of love. It's like glue, like we were talking about, like Sorge, which is the German word for concern or care. When Heidegger was identifying the fundamental nature of Dasein, or being in the world, what being is, he saw that concern was that glue that held everything together. Now, Heidegger wasn't trying to capture any theological language, although he was somewhat of a Lutheran theologian in his own right. He was certainly capturing some theological language, I would say. So the very fact that love would include all of these concepts makes it much more simpler than a system of individual parts that you have to account for each part and understand the essence of each part, where they came from, and why they relate with each other. Love explains all of that. So the concept of matter does not include these, and to infer that they emerge from matter is something that is purely a quantifiable essence of weight, space, amplitude, fields of energy, etc., then one would have to develop very complex models of matter, indeed, conceptually, to account for these pre-emergent properties to exist in matter that explain that when in various relationships, and indeed relationalness itself, the very essence of relationshipness itself must be inherent in matter. and a mechanism conceptually must be construed to explain the pre-emergent properties of matter that facilitates its own emergence. A simpler model, again, is God, which is synonymous with love itself. TJump's view of God is not being simple, conflates simplicity of a cause, assuming all emerges from matter, and God, which assumes that all things emanate from God instead of emerge. Now, with God, since he is above direct observation, we needn't understand how the diverse properties we see emanate from God. However, we can at least in principle reconcile his, which if we cannot directly observe God, and as subjects you can't directly observe a subject. In fact, a subject is the means by which you observe. And the only way we can understand a subject is by communicating or having some sort of relationship with one. We can't turn a subject into an object. Matter, by its very nature, is objective. And therefore, we would expect that everything about matter would be observable. And when we find features of it that are beyond observation and beyond even being included in a comprehensive model of matter, which would be relationalness, then we have very reason to suspect that that's not true. Now, with God, since he is above direct observation, we need to understand how these diverse properties, like I said, emanate from God. However, we can, at least in principle, reconcile his pure essence of love with all these things, for love connects things. It connects things in relationships. Love materializes in relationships. So matter itself, the presence of matter, can make sense with love, because materialization is nothing more than that boundary between one subject to another, what distinguishes one from another, the means by which we interface with other subjects. Then, of course, there would be some sort of material through which that would occur. However, with matter, we cannot understand principle how, say, persons emerge from material states. We observe, given the nature of matter, which is observational. There's nothing that is outside of observation with respect to matter and principle. TJump regularly states that it may be the case that at some point, we will discover and observe the property of matter that explains how emergence takes place with respect to these features. However, as mentioned earlier with the distinction between persons and objects, in principle, we can understand how matter conceptually could be relational boundaries. We can understand how matter develops from a pure mind or from pure personhood. We can see how matter would conceptually be relational boundaries or matters of interest. Matters of concern between subjects, to where the objective can be explained by the presence of multiple subjects. However, it is categorically and logically impossible in principle to observe a subject, for the very nature of a subject is to objectify boundaries between other subjects. And also comprehension and apprehension are two ways of knowing. This is another aspect of TJump's inability to understand many arguments that theists make, particularly Gavin. The former, which is comprehension, is when we objectify something. So to comprehend something, we have to objectify it. Now, apprehension is when we are affected by another, whether commensurably or in some unidirectional manner. What that means is, in apprehension, we're engaging in a relationship, and that relationship is either horizontal or it's vertical. If it's horizontal, it's commensurable, and it's kind of a companionship. But if it's unidirectional, it's based on a hierarchical manner of, like, telling us what to do. In the Latin word assertio, which is a command, like a divine command. The former would be those like us, for example. So in an apprehension that is commensurable, just connecting with people like us. The latter, which is an assertio, or like a command, divine command, which certainly explains how many boundaries of subjectivity are unchangeable. And that would explain why we see many of these boundaries of subjectivity unchangeable, which is matter. And we see that there are certain aspects of matter that are unchanged. We see laws of nature, as many of the pragmatist philosophers like Josiah Royce and Charles Sanders Peirce explained, that laws could very well be just habits, right? They don't have to be laws. They don't have to be like, it has to be this way. It's that way because that's how things normally go. That's how things are normally chosen, right? So are the habits of the divine observed in the boundaries of subjective and personally developmental for us? So that's kind of all I have to say about that, and I'll see you next time.